mention. Indonesia, of course, the world's biggest Muslim country, is finding itself even being part of efforts on the Gaza war, as I mentioned. Just very briefly from you, now that with your decade of involvement, what do you see now in 2024 the key problem for peacemakers and mediators?
Well, thank you very much, Liz. And for me, it's always glad to be back to Oslo. You mentioned Prime Minister Storo was the foreign minister. It was when I was here as the ambassador of Indonesia in Oslo 20 years ago. Look,
you were promoted, you know.
Thank you very much. I would like to see mediation from the wider perspective, because not each of us can play the role as mediator. But we have to talk about the peacemakers, the peace lovers, where many countries can get involved and help the situation. Back to your question, Liz, how do you see the situation right now? Number one, there is an increasing number of conflicts and war. Last year, for example, when we were here, we didn't talk about Gaza because there is no war in Gaza. But now, the war in Gaza happened. More than 36,000 people killed, half of them are children. But once we want to address the conflict, then we feel that sometimes it's very difficult. Qatar feel it very well. Sometimes the conflicting parties doesn't want to make a deal, doesn't want to make a peace, because sometimes they see when they want to make peace, it means surrender for them. So that's why we have to convince everybody to abandon the zero-sum approach. And then the conflict itself becomes more complex, Liz, because it's not, there is a gap on the substance, on the issue itself, but there's also domestic politics and there is also geopolitical rivalries. That makes the situation complex, and we have to embrace all the complexity if we want to contribute. And of course, my colleague from Qatar mentioned about the open door policy. I do believe on that. We have to engage, but in our engagement, don't forget about the international law, because whatever the engagement that we have to do with them, it should be based on the international law. Plus, my last point is about the multilateral system. I mean, the question now is whether the multilateral system contribute to our effort in settling all the conflicts that we have.
Good. Well, that's sort of tour d'horizon, but let us say actors with interests. But I know, Prime Minister, you want to come in for a second.
Well, I mean, just of relevance. You know, we in Norway have been through this for many years, leading up to a couple of weeks ago when Norway decided to recognize the state of Palestine. And I'll share with you one main objective for doing that. And that was also to enable structures inside a state concept that is bound by international law, international resolutions, UN structures, to be the voice in what may become future negotiations. Because if you don't enable those kind of, hard-won structures, which is, inside the state with all the challenges that the Palestinian state will have, you let the other forces, which are the militant, violent, call them terrorist voices, have the day and be the voice. And I think that was the necessary change from our side, because we have always said, we will do the recognition once there is a final peace deal. Well, there is no final peace deal on the horizon. We all want it to happen. There's a government in Israel now openly against it. That is their choice. But I think, for us, it was a way of expressing that what has to come after this war. Let's hope there will be a day after the war which can point to it. Then we have to also give legitimacy and attention to those who will be bound by these principles. Because if not, it will be those other voices that will be dominating. So I think that's an important part here. And that's why I think, the president deserves support for his principled approach to this, ready to talk at a certain moment, being prepared for that, which will be a big hurdle. Anyway, it will require a lot. But this is still, some of the other struggles the president has with neighboring countries not respecting international law. I think the foreign minister says it well. There has to be some foundation here. And that's why, in this case, I think statehood is about integrity around those who will have to speak on behalf of Palestinians in the difficult phase that lies ahead of us.
And that is one of the new tools, if you like, in the mediator's toolbox that we discuss. Diplomatic tool, legal tools, although sadly we see in the case of Gaza, they're not working as well as they should. I want to soon open up the floor to questions, but I'm going to bring you.
Can I add what Prime Minister Sture mentioned about Palestine? First of all, congratulations, and I appreciate very much the position of Norway, Spain, and Ireland to recognize Palestine. Prime Minister Sture clearly mentioned why Norway decided to recognize Palestine, because it will help the Palestine to build a structure, a strong structure inside the state, and it will give also the courage of the Palestinian to be united, because this is very important for them. And again, when I mention about mediation against all odds, actually I want to add mediation and peacemaking, or peacemakers against all odds, because not every country had the opportunity to directly play the role to mediate, but all of us has the responsibility to provide the conducive situation. For example, the mediation on the Palestine issue, we know that it still need a long time, but the question is, those who are not involved directly on the mediation, should we sit back and relax? No, we have to do something. For example, humanitarian assistance. After all, people is always the center of our work, and we have to push that again and again. So unhindered humanitarian assistance is a must. And then number two is preparing or helping the Palestine building their statehood. Then the recognition, the full membership of the UN becomes very important. So again, Liz, those who are not able to directly involve in the mediation, we still can contribute to create peace. And again, people center must guide our work.
And all of that, I mean, it's very important that you mentioned that actually mediation is now taking place on many different fronts. You remember in the Syrian war, how humanitarian aid became part of the political negotiations. And some people said, John Kerry was speaking with Lavrov and Lakhdar Brahimi was there, and they said, humanitarian actors said you shouldn't be bargaining aid for people. That is not to be bargained. That is a right. But in the Gaza and others, it becomes that's really important and essential, but it has to be coordinated. That the people who are pushing toward peace have to be moving in the same direction. And before I open up to questions, Albert, you're smiling, President Hassan.